Hi all, welcome to part 4 of my series on conquering a style. So the final part will be Kasparov versus Petrosian, played in 1983 in the Niksic tournament. Kasparov, playing white yet again, played d4, and Petrosian uncharacteristically played e6, but heading after c4 for the Dutch defence, which apparently he regarded as unsound. So it's a bit of a surprise. Maybe he was trying to get a psychological edge in the opening. After g3 and knight f6, bishop g2, so the Stonewall variation is characterised by this d5. So black is putting the pawns on the light squares and hopes later to do something with this bishop. Either usually it comes out like this later, or maybe on this side. After knight f3, bishop e7, castles, castles, it's all standard stuff. And we'll note in this kind of very complex position that the pieces of both sides are behind the pawns, or most of them. The one piece which isn't behind the pawns at the moment is white's knight, but he moves it now to d3. So everything in white's position is preparing now for a pawn breakout. A key pawn move. Kasparov is actually preparing now for e4, so he wants to first configure his pieces in preparation of that. After bishop g6, the time is not right here to play e4. He first plays e3 and has options now to put his queen on f2 if needed, if he thinks that's optimal. It's interesting actually that he didn't play queen f2 immediately. He first plays queen e2, so it's as though he's preparing e4. But because of this rook e8, this e4 is left tempting now, because black might be able to play e5 if e4. So actually Kasparov now plays queen f2. So it seems as though it's a wasted move, but time is not of the essence at the moment. The position's not open, so both sides can maneuver behind the pawns to try and optimize the piece placement. So when the lines do open, the pieces are well placed. Petrosian plays a6 now, which potentially is a useful move to play b5. After rook ac1, now queen e7 is played. So Petrosian's deciding what to do with his pieces as well. After rook fe1, he doesn't want his queen on the e file if white ever plays e4, so he plays queen f8. So this is quite an interesting kind of symmetry with both queens facing each other on the f file. Now Kasparov plays rook cd1, so further preparation. Potentially he wants pressure on the d file, and it's here that we see the first pawn exchange at move 19. So Petrosian, he takes on c4, and now he plays c5. So he feels that this is a good way of liberating his position, and his pieces are placed well enough now to open some lines. c4 is an immediate target, and Kasparov defends it by playing bishop f1. So there's an indirect defense here. Let's have a quick look at a variation. If rook takes c4 here, knight f4, apparently that's an advantage to white, according to Rybka. So if white's regaining pawn with knight takes e6, and then d5 maybe. So Petrosian actually plays bishop f7, and now knight a4 is played. So Kasparov's really exerting greater pressure on c5, threatening to do d takes c5 maybe. So here Petrosian, he takes on d4, and now he wants to undermine white's control of d5 and potentially show this bishop as being locked behind this pawn. So what he does is actually play b5. So I believe it's a nice positional move, and Kasparov reacts by taking and now playing knight ac5. So his queen f2 earlier helps just putting the knight on c5. And after b4, this pawn's a bit loose, but Petrosian is thinking that maybe his d5 control and white's a pawn is compensation. After rook c1, he plays now queen e7, and he's got this idea of manoeuvring his queen like this to attack white's a pawn. So these two compensations perhaps balance for this apparently slightly weak pawn, and white's in no position to take that pawn at the moment because of this pressure on c5. So bishop h3 is played. So bishop takes f5 is now threatened. So queen d8, and now white takes the B pawn. So queen a5 is played with a little bit of pressure. Kasparov plays very energetically now. Instead of just retreating the knight to d3, he actually plays knight c6. So this is quite a sharp tactical move. So if rook takes c6, then knight takes d7, and there'll be an intermediary check. If rook takes c1, knight takes f6 is check. So that's unpleasant for black slightly. So what Petrosian did is actually take on a2, and after knight takes, now I think this is the key move of the game, where white gets a better endgame position. He plays a nice positional move. I'll give you 5 seconds to see if you can spot it, starting from now. Kasparov plays the move d5, and black is going to be positionally tortured now in this endgame, because the most important bishop in black's position is the dark squared one. If white can get an endgame where this bishop is not very good, stuck behind a pawn on d5, then that gives white quite a few winning chances. After queen takes d5, rook d1, Petrosian is forced now to play bishop c5. So this is his way of making sure he gets Kasparov's queen. But this endgame here is quite inferior. After bishop takes f5, knight b6, rook takes c8, Petrosian can't take the rooks of knight e7, so he has to take with the knight. And now let's move bishop a3. So here we see this knight's being continually cut off from key squares. After h6, rook b1, white is preparing to get the rook on the 7th rank, which is another key thing about these endgames. Knight d4, rook a6, and now bishop c5. So potentially, white's got rook coming on the 7th rank, and his knight on d4 is going to be more difficult to dislodge now with the protection of the bishop. To knight d6, it's interesting Kasparov doesn't take the knight here. He keeps this configuration of knight and bishop versus knight and bishop. He plays the check. After king h7 he plays g4, so he's again cutting off the knight from a key square. And we see the superiority of white's pieces increasing here a little bit. After rook a4, white now improves his king, so relative to the opponent's king it's going to be more aggressive. After knight c4, king f4, and now Petrosian lashes out with g5. Now it would be Christmas if Kasparov played king f5, because then rook a6 and white's king is getting mated in some variations with bishop g6. So Kasparov played actually king g3. The key thing here is white's got potentially a pawn inertia with these two pawns, whilst black's pawns are slightly more fragmented. And Kasparov plays on this now by playing, after rook b7, king g6, he plays knight f5, and he's preparing now h4. So it's very dangerous, white's pawns here on the king side, where black's king is. So after h4, the immediate threat is like h5 and bishop d4. This is very scary for the black king. So Petrosian accepts another compromising move. He plays g takes h4. So he's got now two isolated pawns after white recaptures. And not only that, white can now improve the pawns even more. But first bishop d4, and this pawn is now very dangerous. It's come to f5. But white is threatening all sorts of things here now. So the immediate threat is knight h4, picking up the bishop, because the king would have to be moving back. Because if king g5, then f4 check, and so black is in severe trouble here. Petrosian actually resigned. Let's have a look at some examples. So knight d6, knight takes, rook takes. Now f4 is dangerous. So these pawns are showing how dangerous they are compared to black's pawns, which are virtually immobilized. So say rook a6, king h4. So sealing off h5, threatening now f5, and this just wins black's bishop. So, okay, if not knight d6, what can black do? Say rook e6. It's another variation. Check. and now just winning the bishop. So in a lot of these lines, the bishop on f7 is a real liability because of this horrible threat now of knight h4. So a fine positional game from a Petrosian who was much more fighting than the year before. It can be argued that Kasparov did evolve his style to be much more positional in this game, going for a favourable endgame, always having a slight advantage there because of Black's problem bishop in the Dutch defence, the lion squared bishop. I hope you enjoyed this video, and please leave any comments on YouTube. Thanks very much.